Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. I am here today with a funny twist on guests on our in our community, the mental health comedian, Frank King. Welcome, Frank. It's great to have you here.
Nice to be here.
And, there are many ways that I would usually start this conversation by asking you, how did you get into be doing this work, which I suspect we'll cover. But what I really want to ask you is what's so funny about mental health?
Oh, well, not jokes. Mental health, mental illness, depression, thoughts, suicide, not really a joking topic. However, as with most things, even dark things, there is organic humor when I keynote. I don't tell jokes about depression, thoughts, and suicide, something I live with every day. I tell funny anecdotes. For example, when I say to the audience, in 2010, I came close enough to killing myself, I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. Gets a nervous laugh. And I say, a friend of mine came up after a keynote recently, and he goes, "Hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey, man, can you try to sound slightly less disappointed?" So it's when I did my first TED Talk. I said to the audience, I did some research. I went to TED.com to see how other people had handled the topic of suicide. Figuring out of the hundreds of thousands of talks, there'd be 3, 4, 5 dozen talks on. No, 3 talks. 3. Wow. Then it hit me. Well, duh. If you're really good at suicide, you're probably not going to be recording a TED Talk.
Right.
Yeah. So that's where that's where the humor is in the topic.
So how did you come to be doing this work? Like, what brings you here or brought you here?
Well, I told my first joke in 4th grade, 9 years old. Kids laughed. Teacher was hysterical. Decided I was going to be a stand-up comedian.
I'm sorry about
12th grade. 12th grade, did the talent show. And I won. Of course, competition wasn't that stiff, accordion player, folk dancers. Told my mama, I'm going to be a comedian. I'm going to LA. She goes, "Honey, you're going to college first. I don't care what you do when you get done. You can be a goat herder for all I care. You're going to be a goat herder with a college degree." So I went to UNC Chapel Hill, got a couple of college degrees, then headed for the West Coast. San Diego, which has a branch of the Comedy Store to this day. Same place. And I did my first 5 minutes on stage on April 1st, 84, April Fool's Day. Halfway through my 5 minutes, I heard a voice inside my head, "You're home."
Aww.
Yep. And then decided at that moment I'm going to do it for a living. Had no idea how. 18 months later, said to my girlfriend, now my wife for 35 years, "I'm going on the road to be a stand-up comedian. You want to come along?" Thinking she'd go, "Oh, hell no." And she goes, "Yeah." So we gave up our apartment, our jobs, put everything we could fit into a tiny little Dodge Colt, and hit the road. And we were on the road together 2,629 nights in a row, nonstop, 7 years and change.
Wow.
Worked with Seinfeld, Dennis Miller, Ellen, Rosie, Adam Sandler, Kevin James, Steve Harvey, pretty much anybody who's anybody, Foxworthy, Ron White, Bill Engvall, and then did some radio, and then got into corporate comedy, which is after dinner, after lunch at conventions.
Okay.
Somebody, every now and then somebody asks me, what's the difference between a club comic and a corporate comic? That's easy. $5,000 a day plus travel.
I was going to say the number of zeros. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I'm no math major, but that made sense. Well, then the recession hit 07, 08, 09. And conferences, conventions, bookings dropped off 80% practically overnight. Lost everything in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy that we worked for in 25 years. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. When conventions came back, the meeting planner said to me, "Frank, we love you. We can't pay you that kind of money anymore just to be funny. You've got to teach the audience something." What in the heck am I going to teach the audience? Well, a friend of mine named Judy Carter wrote a book called The Message of You, Turning Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. So I went into it thinking I got nothing. Halfway through, I thought, oh, Lord, I do have something to talk about.
Yeah.
Depression, suicide run in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. There are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. And I have 2 mental illnesses and I have a close brush with suicide. So I thought if I got some training, I could keynote on suicide prevention.
Okay.
So I got the training. Second hurdle, been a comedian 2.5 decades. How do you convince people you can do something serious? Do a TEDx.
Got it.
So I did a TEDx on suicide prevention. And then another 2 TEDx events invited me to come and be a part of their event if I had a different, mental health, but a different aspect, which I did. Those are my first 3. I've done 5 more since then, including my 8th one I just did virtually, the state of Assam in India.
Wow.
TEDx event reached out to me. They found me on LinkedIn. I got a relatively large presence on LinkedIn. They found me and said, hey, we like your take on mental health. Would you do a TEDx? Absolutely. So that's how I got from comedy, a funny speaker, to speaker who is funny.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of different directions that we could go, because I hear depression, suicide run in your family, which is pretty common in a lot of people in our community. And then you got some training. Tell us a little bit about the training.
First one was called Working Minds, Workplace Health and Suicide Prevention as a Workplace Health and Safety Issue. And that's what I keynote on, workplace health and safety issue. And I selected 6 of the top 10 at-risk occupations for suicide because they have a serious problem, pain point I can address. Mm-hmm. That's my marketing, just to those 6 groups, construction, agriculture, attorneys, dentists, veterinarians, such. I'll have a high rate of.
Say it again slowly. Construction?
Okay. Dentists, veterinarians, physicians, attorneys, and can't remember who the other one is.
Agriculture, you said.
Agriculture, farmers.
What's that? Farmers.
Yep, wow. Farmers have a really high rate of suicide. So I chose those as to market to. I'm a big believer when you're marketing something, don't spray and pray. Select your ideal clients, people that really need to hear what you have to say. So, and by the way, since this is a parenting podcast,
yes,
the reason I am a comedian, the reason I am who I am and what I am today, my mom, at 4 years old, I said to her, can I be a police officer? And my mother said, honey, you can do anything you put your mind to. Mm-hmm. And that was the theme when we were growing up. You could do anything you put your mind to. Of course, I flipped the script on her as a 4-year-old and I said, could I grow hair on my chest? She goes, well, with lots of effort in due time.
Maybe a little bit.
I nailed her. Could you? Well, I guess if I put my mind to it, maybe I could. And I didn't know until years later that everybody's parents didn't instill in them the idea that you could do anything you put your mind to. My first wife, and she's a wonderful woman, just her idea of what I should do for a living was not my idea.
Right.
I said, I'm going to do comedy. And she goes, you need to do that. You wanted to do it since the 4th grade. We let's get separated and divorced. She goes, what makes you think you can make a living doing stand-up comedy? And I said to her, my mama told me I could do anything I put my mind to. And my ex-wife actually said out loud, I hate she told you that. Yeah. So
and that would explain why she's your ex-wife?
Yes. Well, I was an insurance man when we married. And became a comedian, kind of a matrimonial bait and switch. Really wasn't her fault.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. And I understand that was not what she wanted, the work full time, get pregnant, have a couple of kids, go back to work part time when the kid's in 1st grade. They're basically the middle class track you run on.
Right.
And she ended up marrying a guy and had a couple of kids. And I'm thrilled that she got what she wanted. But my dad died when I was 8. He was 40. And so my mom raised us. And I've discovered since then that there are worse things than having one really good parent. Mm. I've known people who had 2 parents and it was just a sleigh ride through hell.
Right.
However,
but we often say in our world, it only takes one parent to turn the tide.
Yes. And she did a great job. And interestingly enough, both of my parents were gay.
Really?
Mom was gay. My dad was gay. Yeah. They met in the late 30s in high school. After the Second World War, they both wanted a family. So they got married. They were going to adopt, but there were no infants available. So they decided to do it the old-fashioned way.
All right.
Yes. And my mom...
You mean with the turkey baster?
Yes, exactly. Shortly after Thanksgiving. And so when my dad passed away, my mom gave state boards to nurses. That was her job. She went to work full-time. And many of her friends were nurses. and most all of them were gay. Yeah. So I have a keynote called Everything I Need to Know I Learned from a Lesbian, because I learned how to hunt and fish and change a tire and cut up my steak and all from lesbians, strong Southern women.
Yeah, you'd have a great time at my dinner table.
Well, they say it takes a village to raise a child. Now, give me a couple of shifts of good nurses. We'll get the job done.
I bet.
So anyway, that's on parenting. And my mother had an expression that I think is brilliant, and I've only heard it a couple of times from other parents. I would say to her after I did something stupid, "Do you still love me?" Then she'd say, "Oh, honey, I'll always love you. I don't like you much right now."
Yep.
Which is brilliant, I think, because there's a base of love.
Yep.
But, I don't like you much right now.
Well, and this is the mom who said, when you said you wanted to be a comedian, she's the one that said, sure, after you finish college. Right?
You can be a goat herder with a college degree. Yeah, no, her family, especially even the women going back generations, all educated. And it was just assumed we were going to college. It was not, no.
So did you struggle with any of the depression when you were a kid, or did that surface as an adult with life circumstances?
An adult. I had a relatively good childhood, like I said, one good parent, plus, a softball team for the lesbians. And I got a little depressed in college because my girlfriend that became my first wife went to another school across the country. So I figured I was just, heartsick, lonesome.
Yeah.
I probably was depression at the time, but didn't recognize it. And lifted shortly after I decided to pursue stand-up comedy. My first suicidal thought was January of 84, driving down Highway
84. That's the year you started in comedy.
Yes. One of my TEDx talks is called Suicide, the Secret of My Success, Dead Man Talking.
Whew.
I have something called chronic suicidal ideation.
Say that again. A little
chronic suicidal ideation. It means, for those of us in my tribe, that the option of suicide always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. I say to the audience, when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts: get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. So I hadn't had any suicidal thoughts until January of 84. I'm driving down Highway 163 in San Diego, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and miserable because although my wife, a lovely woman, we didn't belong together. Mm-hmm. We had nothing in common, but opposites attract. She was pregnant, I wasn't. Selling insurance for her father's company, which I hated with a purple passion. Insurance is a great business, but it just wasn't for me. And not pursuing comedy. And I realized that if I didn't change something and fast, I was going to kill myself sooner rather than later. My second thought was very empowering. Wait a minute. I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, hell, I can still kill myself.
Still kill myself, right.
Yeah, that's how I got into comedy. Mm-hmm. So I,
that's how my husband got into coaching. So I
see. Well, and there are a few things on the planet more powerful than somebody with absolutely nothing to lose.
Yeah.
TEDx starts like this. What would you attempt if you knew for a fact? What audacious thing would you attempt if you knew for a fact you had nothing to lose? Yeah. What goal would you pursue if you knew by not pursuing it and standing still, staying where you are, you would literally die? That's where I was in January of 1984. And that's how I got into comedy. And fortunately, they laughed. So that's the comedy piece.
So you said, so this thread of suicide and depression has always been in your comedy. You just learned how to teach something with it when you came back later.
Actually, there was no mention of depression and suicide in any of my stand-up, none to this day. Until I didn't start talking about it until I did that first TEDx in 2014 and put the keynote. And that TEDx became, I took an 18-minute keynote and blew it up to, 18-minute TED and blew it up to 45-minute keynote.
Right.
And became not just a comedian, but the mental health comedian, which, it's A, they're great keywords. B, they're kind of an odd combination. And that's the elephant in the room when I speak. Yeah. And I tell them, look, you're probably wondering. And then I tell them my family history, my history, and so forth. And oftentimes the humor piece will get me the job over other speakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine, because they're looking for the entertainment quality to it.
Yeah, they call it comic relief for a reason.
What strikes me when I think about the people who are listening to this podcast right now, many of us are parents of kids who suffer from depression. whether they're young kids or teenagers or young adults. And I mean, I started dealing with family members with depression and suicidal ideation from a super early age. It was really scary to hear a 6-year-old kid talking about I don't deserve to live. And I don't talk about that a lot, actually, because it is scary. So yep. What do you think, given this trajectory you've been on for the last, 20 years, 10 years, depending on which framework you're looking at?
Yeah, that's right. Or which career.
Right. Which career? What's important for parents who are raising kids with these issues to understand that may be hard for them to hear from somebody who's not a mental health comedian?
One, you hear this. Why would he want to kill himself? He had everything to live for. I believe in the majority of cases, the person who dies by suicide did not want to kill themselves. They simply wanted to end the pain. I didn't want to kill myself. I just wanted to end the pain.
Yeah.
2, suicidality has like a 3-legged stool. Leg 1 is you've decided you can end your life. Leg 2 is you tend to distance yourself, either physically or socially. And leg 3 is something called burdensomeness.
Say it again. Burdensomeness.
Burdensomeness. Yes.
Okay.
You hear people say this, that suicide's a selfish act. Well, from the outside looking in, it is. Weren't they thinking about the people they're going to leave behind? Ironically, with burdensomeness, they are thinking very much about the people they're going to leave behind. And I believed that the world would be better off without me. I knew my wife would be better off financially because I had $1 million life insurance policy and we just filed bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit of a selfless act. I was going to restore her financially by killing myself. It's an irrational act, but they are oftentimes thinking about, so if I were a parent and I had a child who was struggling with depression, perhaps thoughts of suicide, rather than say what neurotypical people generally say, you've got so much to live for, I would say to my child, just every now and then, out of the blue, apropos of nothing, as my mother would say, honey, I know that probably occasionally the thought crosses your mind that we would not be better off without you in any situation. Just reassure them, you need to join the conversation in the person's mind. And that's what they're thinking.
So I'm with you. And I'm going to play a little devil's advocate because I know that this is what parents ask me all the time, which is, but am I putting thoughts into their head?
No, that's an urban legend that you should never mention the word suicide in front of somebody who's depressed. I love the reasoning as a comedian because it would give them the idea. Suicide? What a great idea.
Never thought of that.
Yeah, like it didn't cross my mind.
Right.
Again, ironically, mentioning suicide in front of somebody who is depressed, perhaps suicidal, actually lowers the risk that they will do it because it's now out in the open. Mm-hmm. You're beginning to destigmatize those thoughts. So, yeah, that's the protocol. If you think somebody's depressed, and there are ways to tell, have trouble getting up in the morning but rallying in the afternoon, eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, can't sleep. Let their personal hygiene go. Usually the young person's pretty well put together, but hair's a little dirty, clothes aren't quite so clean. It may be because they're struggling to get out of bed in the morning, run a load of wash, and take a shower.
Or it may be because they're a teenager. So not every teenager, just, putting that out there, and it's fair.
Yes, you have to have, we need a baseline of what their personal hygiene was like before they got depressed.
Right.
Yeah, and people ask me, what do you say to somebody who is depressed or you think they're depressed? Well, here's what you don't say. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? I know.
You should try gluten-free diet. That really helps.
Oh, God, yes. I've got this blue algae. Yeah. What you should say is, look, I'm here for you, and I mean it. I know you're not lazy or crazy or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Good news is with time and treatment, things will get better. I'll take the time. We'll help you get the treatment. Now, here's the tough part. You have to ask them in no uncertain terms, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. And I tell the audience, look, if you can't do that yourself, find somebody who can. If you can't find anybody, and then I put my phone number on, my cell number on the screen, call me and I'll ask them. It's a difficult question. Now, let's say they're not forthcoming. You suspect they're circling the drain, but they don't admit they're having thoughts of suicide. How would you know? Well, they talk about death and dying. You catch them Googling death and dying or how to kill yourself. Death and dying appears as a theme in their music or their artwork or their writing. They're getting their affairs in order. especially if they're giving away prized possessions, because they want to make sure the prized possessions go to the person they want them to go to when they're gone. They're gathering the means to die by suicide, purchasing a firearm or stockpiling medication. Here's a counterintuitive one, very dangerous. They've been depressed for a long time. Now they're happy beyond measure for no apparent reason. Well, the problem is they may be happy because they've chosen time, place, and method. This is going to sound very familiar here. And they know the pain is coming to an end. Okay, but let's say they admit they're depressed and they admit they're having thoughts of suicide. What do you say? Do you have a plan? If they have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed, time, place, and method, need to get them to a mental health facility simply for evaluation. Find out what's going on, perhaps medication. Now, and this is not in any textbook, it's not in any class I've ever taken. I came up with this with a friend of mine who also has chronic suicidal ideation. What if they got a plan, but it's not really detailed, not very specific? What in the world would you say? Well, I would say, all right, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, then I would say, okay, tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever's keeping them here, because something is, otherwise you wouldn't be having that conversation. Could be parents, could be kids, could be pets, could be religion. Whatever it is, you can leverage that to help keep them around.
Yeah, I remember very distinctly having a similar conversation with my spouse, and it was very clear, and he speaks publicly about it, that it was not being willing to do that to his kids and to me.
Yes.
Kept him around.
Yep.
And then having similar conversations with my then teenager similarly about, so what are your thoughts on creating a plan for how to handle it if they start feeling like they're moving towards it? You know, a lifeline plan, or can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not big on promise me you won't kill yourself. I'm not that's not my jam. What I do say is, look, if you're planning on doing that, all I ask is that you call 988, the new 3-digit suicide prevention lifeline, or text 988 before you do. Because I couldn't live with myself if I knew I was the last voice you heard. My suggestion is, A, make sure you get them evaluated and have a physical, because sometimes physical ailments present as mental health issues. And only a third of psychotropic medications on average work well for anybody. A third of the people who take a medication love it, a third, and the other third, dear God.
Yeah.
So there's now a DNA cheek swab test. Take a little DNA like Ancestry, a couple $100, most insurances cover it. You send it off, and what they do is they try to match your DNA, take your DNA, match it with the let's say antidepressant that's going to work best with your metabolism.
Right.
So they narrow it down to a couple of choices. Not perfect, but it helps to eliminate the go on, doesn't work, taper off. Go on, doesn't work, taper off.
Yeah, because it takes a while to taper on these meds.
Yes, the doctor really only knows what the drug salesman told him. Yeah. So you need to, mine, I didn't start taking an antidepressant until I was 60. And 3 weeks later, I'm like, what was I waiting for? Just takes
what are you waiting for?
Well, I'd been taking an over-the-counter supplement called SAM-E, SAM-E. Really good on mild depression, good for your liver, good for your joints. And it was just enough to get me over the hump at 5 o'clock, my low point in the day. And my wife goes, you're 60, for goodness sakes. Ask the doctor, see if he can't prescribe something. So I did. And he goes, why do you need an antidepressant? And I said, because I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. And man, he couldn't write the script fast enough.
Fast enough, right?
Yeah, but what he hadn't been doing, what you're supposed to do is every time you see a physician, they're supposed to ask you 2 questions. Have you distanced yourself socially from whatever? And have you felt hopeless in the last couple of weeks? And if you answer yes to either one of those, there's 7 follow-up questions. But, doctors so busy, people in the waiting room, they're on the clock, X amount of minutes.
Then we hit COVID where everybody felt hopeless. Yeah.
So anyway, and he prescribed one that doesn't make you gain weight because he knew I was bodybuilding. So, and it worked. 2 weeks in, my wife noticed the difference in my demeanor. Didn't say anything, didn't want to, And at 3 weeks, I had this thought, unbidden. I like my life. What the hell?
Who is that? Who got in your head? Right.
Yeah, I have a good life. Lovely wife, been married 35 years. As you see, have animals, nice little house. I mean, it's good life, but hadn't had that particular thought since 84. So, and the doctor offered to up it. And I go, no, it's a minimum dose. It's doing just fine, just enough to take the edge off. So, I mean, I'm not pushing psychotropics. I just think,
For
get
some
a diagnosis.
people, it can make a big difference. For sure.
Yeah, it can keep you around and during the pandemic, I had friends who got depressed, neurotypicals. And I go, look, antidepressants aren't a life sentence. You can take them until and then taper off.
Mm-hmm.
May never take them again. This is this pandemic thing is situational depression. Chances are for you, not chronic.
Chronic, exactly.
Yep.
Well, Frank, it's been a fabulous conversation, and we need to start bringing it to a wrap. How can people find out more about you?
Well, I'm living in a country that does not have an extradition treaty, and there's really no way to contact me here. Did I mention I'm a comedian? Yes. If you go to the web and type in the mental health comedian or just mental health comedian, I'll undoubtedly come up because I've worked very hard even as a 66-year-old to make sure that I've got good SEO. So mental health comedian Frank King.
We'll have it in the show notes as well.
Oh, good. Yeah. Perfect.
Excellent. Any other resources? I heard you reference 988. Any other resources you want to offer to parents or suggest that they pursue?
Yes, absolutely. There's something called National Alliance Mental Illness, NAMI, NAMI, or NAMI, depending on who, your preferred pronunciation. National Association.
NAMI, got it.
Yep.
That's on our website, and we'll also put it in the show notes, everybody.
In almost every large county. And I've got a friend who has a child, now an adult, with schizoaffective disorder, and it was destroying the marriage and the family.
Yeah.
And another friend said, go to NAMI because they have a 12-week course for parents and others who have a person in their family with a particular mental health issue. You learn what to say and not say, what to do and not to do, how to find resources. And they have family-to-family counseling for families that have a child, let's say, with schizoaffective disorder. And here's the best part. Everything that NAMI does is free.
Ooh, beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful. And then you said something about 988, which is, I believe, the new
3-digit suicide prevention lifeline, also text line. They discovered younger people are more forthcoming in text. Yeah. So they have somebody manning the text line to be roughly the same age as the young person who is in crisis.
Super. All right.
And if you're with somebody who's in crisis and they won't pick up the phone and dial 988, you dial 988. And hopefully the volunteer will help you talk the phone into the person's hand who is. And by the way, if they're a danger to themselves, immediate danger to themselves or others, you have to call 911 and get the cops involved. Now, understand, if the cops come and they think they're actively suicidal, they'll bring them in front of a judge and probably get a 3-day involuntary detention order, lockdown 72 hours. So they're probably going to unfriend you on Facebook, but they'll be alive.
Yeah. To be angry at you for the rest of their life.
Yeah, which is fine.
Which is a fair trade-off. Right?
Yes, the important part of that sentence is rest of their life.
Exactly. So as we wrap this up, is there anything else you want to either share with our listeners that you haven't talked about or something you want to kind of bring back to highlight from what you've shared?
Yes. Now, I've given you the signs and symptoms of depression and thoughts of suicide, what to say and what not to say and so forth. Here's the good news. 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. Can't make up their mind. 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means the vast majority of people want to be saved. The vast majority of people can be saved. You do not have to be a clinician to stop a suicide, which means for all the folks in the audience, you can make a difference. You can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as what we're doing right here, and that is starting the conversation.
Yeah. And that conversation doesn't have to be long and detailed and a lecture. What I'm hearing is the conversation is as simple as a question.
Yes. Are you depressed? Are you having thoughts of suicide? Do you have a plan? Very simple. May I finish with a funny story?
Please.
As somebody who lives with 2 mental illnesses, every now and then I get tired of responding to the how are you doing question with the typical living the dream, another day in paradise, especially if I'm tired. So I've done 2 3-hour suicide prevention CE programs, crawled in the back of the Uber. Nice young man, our eyes locked in the rearview mirror. He goes, how you doing? I thought I'm going to tell him. I said, I'm depressed and suicidal. How about you, dude? He freezes. He goes, what am I supposed to say to that? I said, do you really want to know? He said, yeah. I said, you're supposed to ask if I have a plan. So he thinks about that for a second and he goes, do you have a plan? And then it hits him and he turns to the seat and he goes, does it involve Uber? Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right, my friend, this has been lovely. And I want to say I'm super grateful to what you're doing and how you're bringing lightness to a dark conversation. One of the things that I really try to do in my work with parents of complex kids is to keep it in the context of we're living life. And sometimes it's beautiful and sometimes it stinks and it's everything in between. And to hold it lightly, even though we're dealing with really heavy subjects.
Well, and on that subject, and I've heard this from several parents. I did a talk called Mental with Benefits, the Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. Mm-hmm. And the idea was for kids to reframe their mental illness as a combination of mental illness, mental ableness. Mm-hmm. And I've had several parents go, Frank, I've got a child with whatever it happened to be. I've never heard anybody say anything positive. Idea being you treat the mental illness, but then you wrap your arms around, you energize, you celebrate whatever the mental ableness is.
Yes.
And perhaps if it would lend itself to a career like OCD, attention to detail, precision, banking, accounting, architecture, graphic design, things where the detail is very important. Why not steer the kid in that direction?
Play to the strengths.
Yeah, exactly. So that was so if you have parents who have a child with, a complex kid, my talk, and I think you should have it at the bottom of my email. It's called Mental with Benefits, the Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. It really was designed for kids because I kept meeting parents, and every time I asked them about their child, if they had a mental challenge, I go, just out of curiosity, did they do anything really well? Oh my God.
Yeah. And when you play like in the ADHD realm, which is kind of where we started, before we realized that there are very few kids with ADHD that don't also have anxiety or depression or learning disabilities, some of these other issues. The real foundational concept that makes a difference is to play to your strengths and to celebrate the successes instead of that deficit mentality, which is let's look at what's wrong. We want to look at what's right, what's working, and build on that because that's where the possibility is.
Well, in the realm of ADHD, by the way, some of the symptoms of ADHD are very similar to the symptoms of childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So it's often easier just to treat what they believe is ADHD than dig, help try to repair the soul. I got one of my clients is doing a whole TEDx on repairing the soul.
Wow.
Get it what's really, they may have ADHD. It may just be that, but it may be there's some childhood trauma that is causing these symptoms.
Sometimes. And sometimes the having had untreated ADHD creates a trauma experience. So, we've had kids who've been diagnosed with PTSD from, terrible school year experiences or bullying experiences or those kinds of things. So you got a final quote or motto you want to leave us with?
Yes. It's my personal tagline.
What's that?
I am often wrong. I am never in doubt.
I'm often wrong.
But I'm never in doubt.
I know many people who would share that sentiment.
Yeah, I know. I found people who, they have just the opposite. The imposter syndrome thing. It's like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
In my family, we call it Klaus positive. So I'm.
Well, I have what I believe is reverse imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I've thought since I was 9 years old that I am fabulous. And I'm just waiting for other people to figure that out. So.
And that brings us back to where you started, which is the power of a mother who can believe.
Oh my God.
See your possibility. So I love that. And it's a beautiful place for us to close.
Yep.
Frank, thank you for being here. Again, thank you for the work you're doing in the world. It's powerful. It makes a difference. I really, really want to honor the work of destigmatizing mental health and bringing it into larger public corporate arenas. That's where those messages need to get out on a broad.
Well, please put my phone number in the show notes because, I put it on the screen every time I keynote. So
we will do that. Thank you very much. And to those of you tuning in and listening, I want to really acknowledge you for what you're doing for yourself and for your kids, learning, thinking, gaining insight, being present, asking provocative questions that can invite your kids to be their best selves, sometimes save their life. Know that what you're doing makes a difference. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/Sanity School.